Whoa. Hey, how's it going out there? Welcome to episode number 166 of Mirrorless Minutes, regardless of what the graphic says. This is not episode 165. I was in a little bit of a rush today to get the graphic done. So, as you can see, it's just me all by my lonesome tonight. Jerry is traveling this week. He should be in Boston right about now. So, it's just going to be me. Hey, how's it going, John? It's funny. So John is in the chat room here tonight saying hello, and he had messaged me earlier asking if there was a show tonight. And good question, because we seem to be missing shows more and more lately. Just crazy life and crazy schedules. Hey, sweetheart, got Shelly in the chat room tonight. Um, so yeah, we seem to be a little hit or miss on the shows. I get that it's kind of hard to follow us lately. Jerry's got a new work schedule, has him traveling a lot, and I've just had a lot going on in my home life as well. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you know that my son broke his leg the other week, so that's kind of had me tied up a little bit. And actually, he's upstairs in his room, and he's there until I bring him down because he can't really navigate the stairs by himself. So it's just a one guy show this week. A couple of things that I want to talk about. We don't usually talk too much about camera gear news. I think I'd like to start doing that a little bit more, even though I've kind of consolidated what I'm shooting with down to just but a couple of systems. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in other things that are going on out there in the camera world, especially when you know that innovations, regardless of company, spur innovation across the industry as a whole. So tonight I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about Fuji's recent announcement with their new medium format camera, the GFX 50S2, and Olympus or OM Digital Solutions made an announcement. I think it was today or yesterday. I think it was today, actually. It's been a long day. They announced a couple of new lenses, a 20 millimeter f1.4 and a 40-150 f4. So talk about those two things tonight, as well as a personal project that I've undertaken. And like many photographers, I have undertaken a lot of personal projects that just seem to fall by the wayside a little too easily. But I finally found a project that I can do that is easy enough to maintain, and it's intriguing enough for me personally to keep me going with it. I haven't stopped it so far, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's my digital film project. And then lastly, of course, I'll do an image share. I love getting on the show and sharing photos that I've been shooting and talking about, where I was at when I did it, the equipment used, settings, inspiration behind it, and so on. So without further ado, I guess I'll just kind of jump right in to talking about some of the camera news announcements. The first one being Fuji's recent announcement of the GFX 50S2. This is a 50 megapixel medium format camera. And I think what's intriguing about this camera is the price point. So this camera retails for about $4,000. And I know that that's far from cheap for a camera. And I know that it's not something that's going to appeal to everyone, especially those, that are looking at maybe adding a system or maybe jumping into Fuji as a first, bigger system. I know that $4,000 is not a low price point by any means, but the fact that it's a $4,000 medium format camera is kind of a big deal. I think that this kind of opens the door for I'll just say medium format for the masses. Again, the caveat being $4,000 doesn't really make it for the masses necessarily. But I know many people. Hey, what is going on, Ryan? Good to have you in the chat room tonight. Ryan, we're just talking about the Fuji GFX 50S2 and talking about how this is really lowering the bar and making available medium format to a wider audience. I know that there are other camera systems out there that are full frame camera systems that are hitting that $4,000 mark. You've got Sony's flagship camera that is definitely pushing, that price point as well. And again, like I said, I know that medium format, it has this allure and luster to it, that everybody's intrigued by if you've been into photography for any length of time. And this, again, this $4,000 price point really brings it uh, a little closer to a reality for a lot of people. I know when I was, I'll say, expanding my horizons in the photography world, once I wasn't tethered down by contract with Olympus, um, I started looking at the potential for adding a medium format camera rather than going the Fuji route. I mean, I'm in love with my Olympus gear, although probably doesn't look like it because I don't shoot with it as much anymore. But we can talk about that in a second as to why that is. But for my secondary main system, I was really considering the medium format Fuji cameras. But really, the only affordable one for me would have been the GFX 50R. And having had that on loan from Fuji for a couple of weeks a few years back, I really did not like that camera. It just felt too plasticky. It did not feel like what I was expecting a high-end medium format camera to feel like. Just the build quality didn't feel there. The menu system felt a little clunky. The controls felt clunky, which is weird because Fuji is widely known for the tactile aspect of using their cameras. All the controls are right there, their dials for everything, so it's super easy to use. But on the GFX 50R, it just didn't feel there. So I ended up obviously not looking at the Fuji as my second main system and ended up going the Sony route. And I've since added, like, I've got 2 cameras in that system now, so I'm kind of whole hog into the Sony camp as far as the secondary system goes. But I'll be honest that the GFX 50S is really, it's intriguing to me. I mean, if I can find a black market surgeon who will take, a small unneeded organ from me, for me to be able to get that camera, I would definitely look at doing it. There's a look to medium format cameras. It's not like I need it for the insane file size, for doing crazy large prints with software now. I mean, you could shoot with, good Lord, an Olympus pen, and upsize it using, Topaz or, various other softwares that allow for upscaling your images. So you could print large with your phone. I mean, good Lord, we've all seen the shot on iPhone billboards on the side of, 30-story buildings. So it's not like you have to have that bigger sensor. But what I am interested in when it comes to the Fuji cameras is the color science. We all know that their film simulations are just stupendous. And having that on a camera with a sensor that large, that, again, I'm going to say, those 3 letters that drive everybody nuts. It's the DOF, the depth of field that would come with a medium format camera, is really something fun and intriguing to play with. But also the dynamic range on a sensor that large. So the lens. So Ryan's asking what the lens lineup is like on the Fuji medium format cameras. It's fairly robust, and they actually have a really cool package deal, I guess you could say, that if you get that the GFX 50S2, and I'm not going to have the focal links right on this, but you can buy the camera at $39.99, and I think for another $500 you can bundle in, I want to say it's like a 35 to 70, which on medium format 35 is actually pretty wide. So it'd be kind of like a normal zoom range lens. And, you get that lens for another $500. Whereas if you bought it on your own, not part of that bundle, I think it's $1,000 lens. So some of the cool things with that camera, of course, are going to be, of interest to me as someone who shoots outdoors, is that it's weather sealed. So that's a bonus. Again, I don't know what anyone else's weather sealing is like. I know what Olympus is like, and I know that I'm scared to death to shoot any of my other stuff in the weather. But I've seen photos that, people have shot out in the field, basically creating press content, for the announcement. And I did see plenty of shots where people had the camera completely soaking wet. So they trust it. I guess you could probably trust it too. I'll never trust anything as much as I trust my Olympus gear when it comes to that. But again, the lens lineup seems fairly robust. I only have hands-on experience with the Fuji stuff with their, I want to say, it's like a crazy lens. It's like 180 millimeter macro or something like that, or 120 20 millimeter macro. It was a longer lens. It was all they had available to loan me when I got that rangefinder, the GFX or the GFX 50R. Sorry. So I don't really have a bunch of experience with other lenses on that. And yeah, Ryan is right. The OMD is crazy in the weather. I've put that thing through liquid hell and back numerous times, all of my OMDs, and they never fail. They don't even fog up in the viewfinder or anything. But again, so going back to the Fuji medium format, I think it's a really cool thing to see a medium format camera starting to come in at such a lower price point. And I half wonder if this opens the door for them to, the next iteration, or maybe make a like scaled back version of the GFX 50S in an even more affordable form factor. It'd be really cool to see something like that. But I also think that because the price point is so low on that camera, that some of these companies that actually let you rent gear, like Borrow Lenses or Lens Rentals, I think that the rental prices for those will probably be a little bit more affordable than the GFX 100, the 100 megapixel medium format camera. And don't even look at, something like Hasselblad. I mean, you're looking at medium format cameras that are in the tens of thousands of dollars, and Fuji comes, into the party, swinging this $4,000 camera over their head and stealing the show. And I think that's really important for the camera industry to see those kinds of changes happen. They're bringing what was once kind of the unobtainable for everybody into a little bit more of a realm of reality. It kind of harkens to what you'd see like in the automotive industry. Okay, so backup cameras, 10 years ago, backup cameras were like, something you'd find in just a Mercedes or something, that's twice as much as a domestic vehicle. And now, like a Ford Focus or something, some entry level car, you can get backup cameras in those. And I kind of feel like that's what we're seeing in the camera industry with what Fuji's doing with medium format. They're taking these things that were much higher tech, much more expensive historically, and just kind of bringing those down to the common folk, for us to play with those tools. So pretty excited again about that. And I'm considering at some point, once the fanfare has died down, I haven't spoken with anybody at Fuji in a year and a half, but I am curious to potentially reach out to them and see if I can swing a loaner from them on that one and maybe do a little bit more of a review on it, something that I can talk more personal hands-on with on this show, and maybe do, put together some content from it. But very excited. Yo, what is up, Dwayne? How's it going? I hope everybody's doing good out there tonight. Not too bad here myself, kind of hanging in there. So the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about before I take a sip of this beverage, or after I take a sip of this beverage, are the two new lenses that Olympus just announced, or OM Digital Solutions. Look, I'm a diehard. I cut my teeth on Olympus cameras and was a part of that family hardcore for nearly a decade. So it's going to be so hard for me to not always say Olympus, but so I digress. We're here to talk about the two new lenses that they mentioned. Hey, what's crack-a-lackin', buddy? The 20 millimeter f1.4 and the 40 to 150 f4. Now, I guess the first one I want to talk about is the 20 millimeter f1.4. And when I first saw the announcement, and just like most people who, well, now that I'm not in the know with Olympus, my first initial reaction was kind of a general public reaction, which is, well, what's this one all about? You've got a 25 millimeter f1.2. So what are we doing with a 20 millimeter f1.4? Well, I think the thought process behind that is what you're kind of seeing with the F4 Pro lenses, and that is something that's a little more affordable. It's still a fast aperture at 1.4 because it's 1.4 and not 1.2. The size gets to be a little bit more manageable, a little bit lighter, again, a little bit more affordable. And I have not read all of the press release information on this or whatever news is currently out there. I just seen it kind of float across my screen while I was working today. And I'm going to go out on a limb and make an assumption that it's weather sealed, as are all the other not like high end pro lenses like the 1.2s and the 2.8s, but Hey, what's going on, Mr. Mike? Hopefully, you're having good weather over and down there in Illinois. So, Dwayne says he loves the 40 millimeter range. It's close enough to 35 millimeter that I love it too. I think I would use that lens, and while it's not the widest focal length out there, I think that depending on how this lens shapes up when it comes to like coma and astigmatism and things like that, it might make a killer astrophotography lens. I mean, one of my favorite astro lenses, honestly, is the 17 millimeter f1.2. It's about as wide as I can get with a modestly wide aperture at 1.2. I say modestly, being facetious. It's pretty bright lens at 1.2. But for somebody who doesn't want to plunk down the money necessarily on a lens like that, I think that the option, depending on pricing, for this 20 millimeter f1.4 would probably make a fairly compelling astrophotography lens. Um, you know, Software helps, mitigate some of the high ISO issues you'd find on the smaller sensor cameras, and OMDs handle higher ISOs pretty well. I mean, it's not like a Sony or Nikon, or Canon handling of high ISOs with those larger sensors, but it still does a really great job. But if you can shoot wide open at 1.4, then you don't have to worry about any kind of noise issues and post processing and things like that, because you could shoot at a lower ISO and still maintain, great light gathering ability thanks to that wider aperture. So again, I apologize that I don't have information on pricing. If it's out there, I just didn't do my due diligence. I honestly wasn't sure if I was doing a show tonight or not. So little impromptu here, but depending on how the pricing comes in, how competitive it is against the 1.2 primes, I think that 20 millimeter f1.4 might be a really great lens for a lot of people. Should be fun to shoot with. I'm not going to buy one. I've got, I think, everything I need in the Olympus environment, save for, something extremely telephoto, beyond 400 millimeters, and there's nothing out there yet. So, if I do get another Olympus lens in the future, it'll probably be something that long. But speaking of longer lenses than that 20 millimeter, the other lens that was announced by OM Digital Solutions was their 40 to 150 f4 Pro. And instantly on, websites like Petapixel or wherever they were sharing news, I saw a few comments where people were griping, that, how is this an improvement over the f2.8? Well, I don't think that it's supposed to be an improvement over the f2.8 4150, which is, again, one of my favorite lenses ever. I don't use it nearly often enough, but it's an astoundingly great lens. But I think, again, what you're seeing with these f4 lenses is an affordable entry into a really high quality lens in a great focal length, weather sealing. I'm sure it's probably gonna forego the focus clutch, which I would expect. Hello, Jason Helmer. How are you tonight? But again, so because it's not an f2.8 and it's an f4, we can reduce the size, we can reduce the weight, because again, there's always somebody who's going to poo poo something when it comes out, and as Olympus started developing all of their f2.8 lenses and, things like the 300 millimeter f4, those are bigger, heavier lenses, but they're bigger and heavier lenses, again, because of their aperture, because of their construction, because of the features that were built into them, etc. And people started to complain, well, I got into Olympus because everything was supposed to be small and light. Well, of course they want to make things small and light, but at the same time, they want to be able to cater to people who have a higher level of expectation for equipment, or a need for a better built or higher quality piece of kit, not necessarily something super affordable, super small, super light. Well, I think they've got their roster of lenses built out really well with the really high end lenses. And I think they're starting to backfill and replicate existing focal lengths with more affordable options that are still at a higher quality. I mean, it's not like a 40 to 150, 5.6 to 6.3, which would be, super tiny, super small, super cheap. And they need something at every part of that range, from super budget conscious not as concerned about, the best of everything, to someone kind of in the middle, like an enthusiast, and then stuff, kind of more towards the pro end. And I think that's what we're seeing with this 40 to 150 f4 pro lens. So I for one, super pumped that they're doing this. They have got to have Olympus, when I'm speaking here, has to have probably one of the most rounded out lens lineups of any camera manufacturer out there. And I just hope that OM Digital Solutions continues to come out with new camera bodies for these lenses, and keeps innovating in the tech department, because regardless of where Olympus is at in this landscape currently, they have been a massive innovator in technology, both in lens technology and in camera technology. And seeing these new lenses come out, just it's reassuring that hopefully they live on for a while longer and continue to, kind of influence the photography landscape. So those the two kind of camera news things that I, felt like talking about tonight. And I guess I'll just jump right in after another drink. My mouth is getting so dry. I find that if Jerry's not here for me to let talk every once in a while, my mouth dries out because I don't take a break from talking. So, yum. Okay, next up, this little project that I've been working on. Let me talk about my project. So, I'm calling it a digital film project. And the reason I'm calling it that is because, well, for one thing, I'm trying to treat this sort of like if I had a film camera. Again, like I said, I cut my teeth on Olympus cameras. And when I say I cut my teeth on Olympus cameras, I mean, I started off digital. I do not have a film background whatsoever. I know I'm an old man. I should have started off in film like everybody else, but I just didn't get into photography till late in life. So I started off digital with no film background. But something I do remember from being younger and my parents having cameras that used film is that you'd put the film in and you shoot photos. And sometimes you don't necessarily finish the roll, and you bring the camera back out for another occasion and you shoot some more, and then you bring it back out again for a trip, and then that roll is full, and then you put in another one. And then when you go get that first roll developed, there's all kinds of stuff on it. Like, who knows what in the hell is on that roll of film, because you shot it over a period of time and you may have forgotten the different events that were shot on it. So it's kind of what I'm doing with this project. And I'm doing it kind of like I did with my pen, my Olympus pen. I only put primes on it. So now my Fuji has been relegated to a restricted shooting mode, which is I'm taking this little XE3 and I've got one memory card in it. And I've got this set to a custom black and white film simulation that I kind of developed using this spreadsheet that I've got of all these other film simulations that someone had put together for Fuji cameras. And I took one of these cool black and white ones and tweaked it to kind of how I want it to be. So the camera's set in black and white only. I'm shooting RAW plus JPEG, and that's kind of cheating, but I feel like if I want to go back later and cheat and maybe do a color version of one of the photos, I at least have the RAW to do it with. But my goal is to just end up with a gallery of images shot on this camera that are in black and white. But the caveat is that the memory card does not come out of this camera until it's full. So this is where I made a mistake. It's a 32 gig card. It's going to take me a long time to fill this card up. But the fun part is going to be when it comes time to offload the images. I'm going to pull the card out and I'm going to create a gallery over on Flickr or an album, and I'm going to dump all those pictures into that. And there will be things that were shot, 6-7 months, maybe a year prior when I first started the project that I've completely forgotten about. And it's going to be for me, it's going to be kind of fun. And I have sort of limited, kind of the subject matter that I'm going to be shooting with this. I'm not going to be out like chasing landscapes and storms, or I'm not going to be, going in and urbexing and stuff like that necessarily. This is going to be, I really don't know how to phrase this or describe it, but I'm just going to call it like Americana photos. The camera will be with me as often as humanly possible. So as I travel back and forth to work, it just sits in my car. Every time I remember to grab it, it just goes right in the armrest of the car. And it's going to be those things that I just see when I'm out and about, whether it is an abandoned gas station in a small town somewhere in northern Michigan, or if it is shopping carts on the side of a building, that are turned over with a teddy bear sitting on it. I don't know, whatever. Just these random things that I see that are just kind of slices of life that I happen to notice on my day to day. So John says maybe just pick a date and pull the card, but the card won't be full like a roll of film, John. So that's my personal restraint on it, is that the card doesn't come out of the camera until it can't hold anymore. In hindsight, before I started this, and this is how dedicated I am to this project, because I could just take the card out, and I do have an 8 gigabyte card. You remember those 8 gigabyte? Remember how old that must be. But I should have started off with a smaller card, but I'm so dedicated to sticking with this project, I'm leaving the 32 gig card in it. Luckily for me, I am shooting RAW plus JPEG, so that kind of speeds up the process of filling this card. But I'm having a lot of fun with it. I have not gone back and looked at what's on this either. I mean, I could cheat and just turn it on right now and just start scrolling through the images, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to allow myself to be surprised and excited about, maybe disappointed in, I don't know. But it'll be fun to go back and look through the images that caught my attention, and I felt benefited from a black and white treatment, and pull them off of the camera. And it's something that I think, so this is like an extra camera I have. And if you don't have an extra camera, I mean, I think it's a fun project. I'd be interested to see if other people do something similar to it, or like John. I don't think John has the patience to fill the card, but maybe John sets a date for like 90 days and then pulls the card. But if you don't have an extra camera to do it with, if you have a camera that has 2 card slots, you could put your project card in one of the slots and just toggle to that. And when you're out with your camera, if you see something that fits the bill for your project, you just switch to that card and shoot it, or you could just carry the other card in your camera bag. And if you see something on your adventures, that fits the bill for your project, then throw that card in and shoot it. And when you get that picture done, pull the card out and just stick it back in the bag. But for me, part of the fun is going to be the fact that when the card is full and it comes out, I'm really going to have no idea what all is on it. So fun project. Hopefully I have an update in a future show where I kind of talk more about what I ended up shooting, when the whole project is done. But it is something I'm going to stick to. And so far, so this project began about 3 months ago. So I've kind of been sitting, I haven't shot that much with it either. So it's really things that have to stand out to me, have to stand out and feel like they belong as part of this project. And I'm hoping when it's all done that everything has a cohesive look too. I'm terrified that I'll spend a year filling this card up and then everything just looks like random mess. So Mike says it could be a great project for his X100V Fuji. Yeah, says maybe it would encourage him to actually use it more. Might take him several years to fill up a card. Not sure if you have that much patience to wait. That's where John's version of it comes in handy. You give yourself 90 days or 60 days or 180 days or something like that. I think that switching to a smaller card, Mike, would probably help with the project. I really screwed up by putting a 32 gig card in here and not allowing myself to take it out. But again, I'll check back in with you guys, when it's full. God, I hope it's full in less than a year. It's going to be pretty horrible to be a year out and have somebody say, so how is that Fuji project coming, or your digital film project? So again, God willing, I'll have this thing full in less than a year and be able to share the contents of that. So that's my project. Again, I feel like for me, it's a project that I can actually do. It doesn't require me to go out every single day and shoot a photo like a 365 project. It's not a project where I have to go out of my way to do anything. I just have to have the camera with me. That's all it is. So, yeah, I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. If you're listening to the audio version of this, just shoot me a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what a project like this might look like for you. So Cool. And I guess the last thing to round out the show is I will share some photos. And because Jerry's not here, I can spend a lot of time sharing photos and I don't have to share. So let me get this queued up here. So it's been a while since we've done a show, and a few things have happened since the last show. I don't recall sharing images from my trip to Chicago with my sons about 2 months ago. So a month and a half ago, something like that. So I figure I'll share these now. This is my oldest son, Mason. And, for those of you with little kids who are listening or watching, it's easy to take pictures of your kids. But as they get older, the ease of doing that pretty much goes out the window, and your kids don't want anything to do with getting their pictures taken. But my son is really into this style of clothing called tech wear, and he's really into it. We live in a small town where no one is into it. And in the bigger city like Chicago, he was actually seeing people wearing clothes like he was wearing. So he was pretty pumped. And prior to going to Chicago, I told him to say, hey, pack up some of these clothes you like, and maybe we'll do a photo shoot when we're there. So that's what this is. We're on the river walk. I don't remember what bridge we're under, but we're under one of the bridges along the river there, and just shooting with the Sony A7 III. And this is with that Viltrox 85 millimeter f 1.8. And I still use the Nik software plugins. I really love some of the looks you can get with those. So this was processed using Nik's analog effects. Before it went to analog effects, though, I did use a color profile that's kind of a teal and orange, and then threw it into analog effects to kind of give me that that light leak look at the bottom of the image, and then also to fade the image a little bit just to give it a distinct look. And I think the highest compliment I could possibly get is that my son, who never uses Instagram, the other week posted that photo on his Instagram and said, God, I love this photo that my dad took of me in Chicago. So that completely made my entire day to have my son really dig the photo. And the next photo is of my other son, who I have, unfortunately, with him being the second born, even fewer photos of. So, and this was just one of those things where every time we were out somewhere where I felt like there might be some sort of an interesting scene, everybody who's familiar with Chicago knows about the L, their elevated train and subway system. And the steps going up to the elevated stations are always a favorite spot for me to stop and shoot. So, of course, I posed my son on the steps. And this is shot, again, with that same Viltrox lens, the 85 1.8 on the Sony A7 III. And again, this is quite literally using the exact same process as used on the previous photo. You can see the light leak at the bottom makes it really orange. And so analog effects, and then just a teal and orange cross processing, or I guess you don't call it cross processing. I don't remember the term right off the top of my head now, but it's basically like a teal and orange LUT is what I used. So, and then later on in our trip, the boys and I decided to head down to the river, and we were going to take an architectural cruise. I'd never done it. Honestly, wasn't sure if it would be any good or not, but while we were waiting for the architectural cruise to start, the sky just lit up, just super amazing with light. I was just completely dumbfounded. And we were standing in this line, and I asked the security guard if I can just kind of bypass the line and run out to the dock so I could get an unobstructed view of the skyline. And he was totally cool with it. So I ran out again, Sony A7 III, and this is with Tamron's 28 to 75, and this is cranked in at 75 millimeters. And I'm getting pretty decent at hand holding, a little bit longer focal length shots with the Sony. So it was pretty easy to do. And you know what? This one is straight out of the camera. I did no editing to this. So pretty pumped as somebody who likes to edit the hell out of their photos that I got this one out of the camera to look like that. So it was pretty fabulous. This is shot on the architectural cruise from the river in Chicago from a moving boat. And I think I made a comment on Facebook when I shared this image of the Marina Towers that there are times when being able to shoot a ridiculously high ISO comes in very handy. So Granted, this wasn't insanely high, but this is ISO, I think 12,800, straight out of the camera, no noise reduction, nothing. So the Sony just does a stupendous job with the higher ISOs. And this is shot with the Samyang 14 millimeter f2.8. And, I had to shoot at an ISO that high in order to get a fast enough shutter speed to where I didn't have blurring from being on a moving boat in the river. So pretty pumped with how this turned out. And again, part of the rationale for having, a full frame camera is being able to pull off shots like this, relatively easily. And then moving on. So the next photo, this was taken just the other weekend in what we call the Thumb region of Michigan. It's such a great place to go for wide open vistas in Michigan. It's about the flattest place we have in the entire state. And while we were there, my girlfriend and I were out just kind of chasing after this weather. We were supposed to go to these gardens in Midland, Dow Gardens, and walk on these bridges in the trees. But as soon as we got there, like off in the distance, it was black and we could hear thunder rumbling, and figured that walking up in treetops during a thunderstorm probably isn't the smartest thing. So we kind of backpedaled on that idea, jumped in my truck, and then tried to race ahead further up into the Thumb area to get ahead of these storms as they came across the bay and made landfall. So it kind of worked out pretty good. We got out there, set up in time to shoot, and just kind of chase this weather for a little while. And this is shot with, again, this is with the Sony a7 III again. And the only way I found to get lightning on these cameras for me is just to shoot time lapses and try to get your shutter speed to be as long as possible. So on the Sonys, unfortunately, you can only go down to your base ISO of 100. You can't use the extended ISOs in a time lapse for some reason. So this is shot at the base ISO of 100, and this is at like f22 so that I could get it as long of an exposure as possible. And this one is with the Tamron 28-75. And I don't remember my shutter speeds on this, but they were about a half a second with those settings, and just set it as a time lapse and start running. It works. I catch lightning pretty frequently now using this technique. The only downside though is that I end up with, 600, 700, 800, 1,000 frames of just clouds moving by, and unfortunately no photos of lightning. Like consistently, you have to just dig through to find your photos, but it worked out pretty well. I was pretty happy with doing this. And what you can see in this shot is I had been seeing lightning coming from the left side of the frame, and I wanted this composition specifically with the silos, and there's a cell phone tower in the far right hand corner. I wanted this composition. I knew where the lightning was starting and coming from. So this is like one of the first photos in a series of photos that I shot in that same general composition. But the next photo would show that as the storm moved on, the lightning kept moving further and further to the right or further to the east. So again, setting up for shooting a storm, pay attention to the radar, know where the storm is coming from and where it's moving to. And then you can just basically compose your camera, set up, and just watch the lightning as it moves its way across your composition. Kind of a fun thing to do. And same thing with this one, pretty much exact same setup. It's the a7 III. It is with the 28-75, still base ISO, still f-stop at 22, but you can't really tell it from the way this looks because there's been post-processing to lighten up the foreground some, but the shutter speed got longer and longer because this storm was darker and darker as it moved through. So these are probably like 1 second exposures to capture this one bolt here. A lot of fun shooting these storms, and I'm happy that I'm finally getting some consistent results using the Sony gear instead of the Olympus. The Olympus gear is the live composite is ridiculously cool for lightning. I just don't prefer to use it when the clouds are super visible because you get that crazy streaking that goes on in your clouds with live composites. So kind of changing up my game a little bit for storms when it's a little lighter outside and just shifting to the Sony gear. And then the other night I ran out up north. There was all this hype and hullabaloo about the aurora making an appearance. There were two CMEs back to back about an hour apart. And the thought was that with them hitting the earth one right after the other, that it should be one hell of a show, and it was one hell of a not show. So, but I did have fun at least going up there and shooting in this location. I got this cool fireball shooting star that kind of went down. And but what really is kind of the showstopper for me with this image personally is that the barn and the road and the soy crops on the side of the road in the original image were pretty much black. And again, you know, with the full frame sensor on the Sony, is able to push the shadows completely to fully exposed by just using an adjustment brush in Lightroom and painting in exposure. And it just turned out just ridiculously good. Again, I'm constantly floored by the differences in how far you can push a file from one camera system to the other. So I was pretty happy with the results of this. And the next two photos I'm sharing just again kind of further illustrate the differences in how far you can push a file from, like, say, a full frame to a smaller sensor camera. And so this shot, I was just playing around and pointed my camera straight up at the Milky Way on the tripod and started playing around with my ISO and just bumping it higher and higher and higher and higher and higher just to see what would happen. I hadn't done that before. So this shot is at ISO 51,200 in an area that, again, as you can see, there's some light pollution off in the distance there, but looking straight up, you know, you can tell that it's pretty much black. So again, this was shot straight up at ISO 51,200. But when I saw that it was pretty much just pure white on the back of the camera, I was curious to see what it would look like if I got it home and tried to dial the exposure back. And then, so this is what dialing the exposure back down like 3 stops ended up doing. It ended up creating a very, very usable image. So again, perfectly happy and pumped to be able to experiment and do stuff like this, you know, with another camera system. And again, just learning my way through the whole other system. And then just a couple of more photos here at the end. Recently did some urbexing one more time at a place that's right here in town where I live. I went with a local photographer to this abandoned factory and decided I was going to go in and just use my vintage glass. And again, on the Sony, I use that camera a lot, especially when it's going to be lower light. So, and in most abandoned factories, the light tends to be really, really low. So that's what I did. I was in here in this factory with the Sony A7 III and my Minolta 50 millimeter f1.4. It's an old lens from the early 70s. And I just love the way that this renders the out of focus areas is a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate what this lens can do. So that's what that was shot with. And this is base ISO handheld at f1.4. You get a fast enough shutter speed to be able to pull off shots in a darker area. And again, another shot from the abandoned factory, just the color of the paint on these walls and the light being filtered in through a couple of windows just was one of those. It was just one of those scenes that just made me say, yep, we're definitely going to take a photo of that. And finally, the last one was just from the other day. We had some stormy weather roll through the area. Unfortunately, it missed my area, went just south of town, but it was right about at sunset and the light was crazy. It had this weird, I can't even describe it. If you've been out after a storm rolls through or as a storm is coming in at sunset, you know how the sky just takes on insane hues. So knowing that the light was doing this, I raced to the closest place that has what I like to consider a fun and interesting foreground. And that's these old trucks on this piece of property. And the owner's given me permission to shoot there. So I raced out there. And when I got there, the gate was open to the property. So I drove right out to the truck. And it was funny because the owner of the property was off in the woods and come out and said, I was wondering if you were going to be here. So yeah, I was there and it was a lot of fun. This is just a still frame from a time lapse that I was running because I've kind of been treating these trucks at this location the way I treated the barn that I used to photograph. And that is, I have this bucket list of all these different things I would like to capture at the truck. I like great lightning at the truck. I want a star trail over the truck. I would love to get aurora over the truck. It'd take one hell of a show to make that happen, but I mean, I think you get the gist of it. I want to capture these trucks with a variety of different seasons and a variety of different environmental conditions and phenomena. And this sky was one of those times. And again, I said this was a single frame from a series of images from a time lapse because I was hoping to get lightning, but I only got one lightning bolt and it was tiny and hair thin and not even worth sharing. But the light was so great in these photos that I just figured I don't need the lightning. I'm just gonna share a still from the time lapse. So that is all I've got there. And what do you know? My camera turned up. Oh, there it is. Okay, that was weird. But yeah, so that's kind of the show this week, folks. And thank you, Steve. I love being in those old abandoned places. So and the light is always fun. So I'm glad you dig that too. It's a lot of fun to be in there. I'm going to wrap this show up. My mouth is crazy dry. I have a little bit of bourbon left in my glass that needs my attention. So I will be back in hopefully 2 weeks, barring no broken legs from work, children, and nothing crazy going on in work. And if Jerry happens to be in this state, then he will be on the show too. But until then, thank you guys for tuning in as always. And if you got any questions about the show, just feel free to message me. And I'm going to work on getting these photos over to Facebook into a gallery. For those of you who are listening to the audio version, you can swing over to the Mirrorless Minutes Facebook page and check out the photos we talked about tonight. Again, thanks everybody for watching. You guys take care, and I will see you in